Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about CVs. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, how do you read the CV of a programmer? In the video you mentioned that you can detect incompetent engineers by reading the CV. Could you elaborate? So this was posted on an old video where I think that I explained that uh, I get hunches for certain CVs, but I want to make this very clear, guys, and this is very important that you understand. I think I have at a few times mentioned this as well when people ask me about how do you do an onboarding process or like how do you create a hiring process more accurately. Uh, you never know with software developers. You can't know. So what I usually say is that I usually don't use the CV. The only time I really look at the CV is most of the time if I look if my manager or the company I'm working with, whoever is looking for software developers, if they need a really senior software developer, someone who can lead a team or someone who really knows their stuff, then I look at the CV and I only look at years of experience and roughly the sort of projects that they've been working on. And that's only because there's no point in me wasting time talking to a fresh graduate student about such a role, because they haven't done enough years, even if they're really good software developers. But if I'm just looking for good people for different roles, if it's junior all the way up to senior, then I don't really think so much about, you know, what the CV says, because I argue to people, and this is a recommendation I make to all IT companies, you don't know how good the person is just based on the CV. You always have to do the personal interview, and that has to be done with someone who is good at software development, a real senior software developer, and not one of your engineering managers, not one of your people who sort of say that they are in charge. We're talking about the person who actually ships the code. The reason why that's important is because these are the people who actually do the job, not the people who are hired to manage the people who are supposed to do the job. It's the person who actually knows the tools and the stack and so forth. So you always have a two-step process. You give people an upfront code challenge of some sort, ideally something that reflects what you do in the company, because lead code and these more advanced algorithmic problems is usually not the way, in my experience, not the way to go. It's better to get something that it reflects what you're going to do in the project and evaluate, and that's just to screen so that you can then go and do the interviews. You don't have like 200 300 people to go through for everything every role that you want, right? And then in the interview, you ask questions relevant to, well, the experiences a person will need in order to survive in the company or to do the job and so forth, which requires seniority. And even when you do that, guys, I can tell you this, I have talked to some software developers who are, they seem good, they can handle the code test. When I talk to them, they know all the tools and they have a good experience and so forth, and then they start working and then they are unperformant or below average or so forth in terms of productivity and so forth. They don't meet expectations because that's how flawed interviewing people is, and it's the same in basically every company. That's the reality. You don't know a person until you have been working with them for a little while. But the one time I actually do use my hunches or gut feeling, which is, based on, I'll tell you sort of what I usually base it on. The only time I do it is if I have a really long list of candidates, and I need to sort of figure out who am I going to talk to first. That's the only time, really. And I trust me, it doesn't matter usually which order you put them in, because if when you order, you still go through each and every one, and as I said, the norm is that the CV is a really bad indicator of how good someone is. Guys, I've been doing plenty of interviews with people who have quote unquote 14, 15, 20 years of experience, and they're laughably incompetent. And you won't, I mean, literally, at this point I've lost count of how many times my manager who wants me to do these things has said, I'm going to send you someone really good, I'm going to send you someone really good, and they can't tell me even basic stuff. In some cases, they've even been able to tell based on the questions that I asked them, oh yeah, this is probably not the place of work for me? And these are questions that some candidates who don't have their amazing CV fly through, no problems whatsoever. That's why, as I said, it's very difficult to tell from the CV if someone's good or bad, but you can get some indicators. Now, the usual indicators are going to be that I look at a combination of things. The three main things is years of experience, which is obvious, I hope. Tools, what they have used, like the different languages and like things of this nature, or like frameworks, etc., and what types of projects that they have been working on. The reason why these things are very important is because usually the ideal candidate is always a difficult thing. It depends on the specific role that you're looking for. But the combination of the tools that you've been using, the years of experience, and what type of projects that you've been working on will tell me what you have been exposed to and what type of responsibilities that you have taken on as part of the development process. What type of workflow are you usually accustomed to? If I'm, like, for example, really bad indicators of software developers' proficiency, if we're looking for like corporate enterprise level stuff, is if they've only worked on like stacks that usually only really work at small scale, or if they've been doing work on projects that are usually like client by client, like a lot of consultancy, or like these one-off projects where you're going to ship a mobile app and you worked on that thing for 6 months or a year or something like that, and you used React Native for that, and then the next thing was like a PHP website or a WordPress thing or so forth. And I start seeing a pattern in that, all right, most of what you have been doing is like these sort of very simple deliverables towards a third-party client somewhere, who most likely is just buying these services either from you personally or someone at your firm, or like it's basically a small agency or a consultancy where you're mainly shipping like these low stake, usually low complexity projects. But if I, on the other hand, see that, all right, so you have relevant experience with the main cloud providers, you have serious backend like coding languages in your profile with sort of the main frameworks that are usually used on at the enterprise level. I see that you have some DevOps experience because you've been working with the things that usually are most in line with what like large scale development is, and you've been doing that at usually larger firms or at more serious projects where they do some type of large-scale development. These are good indicators because that reflects very well the sort of work that you will do then if I hire you for this other position and so forth. It's the same. These are the same sort of developers that most people are looking for, because at that scale, at that level, usually you have to learn how to deal with a much more complicated set of requirements than, as I was saying, if you like if you're working on these more low-stake projects. So if I see a lot of these smaller things or small-scale development tools and a lot of these helpers, like as I was saying, there are tons of these different tools like Gatsby, WordPress, Django, like etc. It doesn't necessarily mean that the person is bad. It's just that if I see that together with mostly small scale, like short-term mobile development, or if you're primarily working with like 6 months projects, 1 year projects, and you have a lot of that stuff, it's not bad. Or like a lot of people who work primarily, say, with PHP development or Ruby on Rails or things like that, all of these sorts of things give me an indicator of, all right, what level have you been working at? And the reality is, guys, that most of the really large, serious software projects usually have a flavor of tools that they use. So if I see that most of the stuff is not really like, or if you're just adding a classic one is like you have almost no years of experience and you put every single tool in the entire world on your CV, and I go, all right, that's probably a person who's dabbled a lot with a lot of concepts. The problem is, as I said, guys, I don't really know. I can't tell just based on the CV. I can sort of order you based on what I think, but I still have to do the interview with you because you might be really, really good. But as I said, this is just a hunch type of thing. It's super unfair, it's super subjective, but at least with me, which I hope is a nice thing, you're not going to have to worry that you're not going to get the interview. It's just that question of who do I talk to you first, or do I talk to you, talk to 2 other people before I talk to you? So what I want you to take away from this is that I usually don't like, I don't believe at all that you can from just a CV say if someone is good or bad. You can get an indicator of what type of developer you're dealing with, because as I said, usually the really, really good software developers, they are made in specific environments, and that usually happens in the sort of development environments where we do serious, like fairly serious software development. Most of the time you will see the smaller agencies and different companies, they want those developers. It's just that they can usually not pay for those developers, because these are the developers who actually run really large IT projects. They usually have exposure towards, as I said, the main tool stacks that most of the large-scale companies are using. They usually are involved in not just shipping a short-term deliverable or something like that. They usually have they know how to take ownership. They know how to, at the very least, work with different telemetrics systems, deployment pipelines, all of this sort of stuff that you do in serious software development. If that's the sort of profile I see on a CV, it's usually something that I will put a little bit higher, because these are usually the software developers who have exposure towards the sort of mainstream programming that we're looking for. And if I usually see a lot of these off-the-shelf solutions, a lot of small scale, low scale, or low complexity projects, which is usually, as I said, the things that you see in developers who are primarily working with small agencies or things like that. It doesn't mean that they're bad. They might be geniuses. Guys, one of the best software developers that I work with is a self-taught freelancer who my manager was unsure, should we hire this person, because he's never really worked in a large scale company, and he is literally the one of the best that I've ever worked with. And this is what I tell people: you cannot judge based on just a CV. So don't use this hunch thing that I'm talking about, which is error prone and is unfair, but it is the best thing I have when someone asks me which order should I talk to these people, because I can't just say, hey, just pick somebody, when my manager wants a list of people to call and someone to like start off the process with. And that's all that's all this is. Some people are, I swear to you guys, and that's unfortunate, but some people will dismiss you based on these tools. So if you really want to like stack your CV the best way it possibly is possible to make it the best way possible, you have to consider not just that you are coding, but that you are working on projects that actually make you into the sort of software developer that the larger companies or like the serious IT projects are looking for. And that is a whole different video, because as I said, I've touched on a few things that you can that we can talk about. But the reality is, guys, that some sorts of development is not at the same level as other forms of development, even though it's still going to pay the bills. So just think about that. Have a great day.